Geraldine was one of those great colleagues because we were, in a way, competitors as well as colleagues. And, you know, it's true, the old thing, a little bit of competition doesn't do anybody any harm. And I remember the two of us sitting in the press conference when Bertie Ahern, who was now suddenly the new leader of Fianna Fáil, it was during that period, if you remember, between the fall of the Reynolds government and that period where we thought there was going to be a Bertie Ahern government, and it didn't turn out to be the case. And Geraldine and I were sitting beside one another at the press conference, and she was working at that time for the Irish Times, and I was working for the Tribune. And she suddenly leaned over to me and she said, have you got a story for Sunday? And I said, well, there's loads of things happening, but I mean, what do you mean a story? And she said, like a big story, like a lead story. And I said, no. Well, I have, she said. And that story was the story that stopped Bertie Ahern becoming Taoiseach in 1994, and fair to the story. She always had. Can I first say thank you to Joan and to John O'Connor for what has been just a terrific weekend. Because we had a great day today, but the fact of being in Ballybunion and the fact of being in this welcoming house, and it feels like a house, not a hotel, that's just wonderful. So, ever since I can remember, I wanted to be a journalist. I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't want to be a nurse. I didn't want to be a translator. I didn't want to be anybody in foreign affairs, which all my nuns at school wanted me to be. I wanted to be a journalist. But they brought the walls down for us, and I have never forgotten that. You know, when people say, well, you did this the first time and you did the other. Yeah, but there were a load of women beforehand who had gone on the Late Late Show, gone on various current affairs shows, and had pointed out that there were no women faces on television and no women's voices on current affairs radio. They fought that battle for us, and I'm extremely grateful for it. Was it hard to make your way as a woman at first? It was. My first editor insisted that I wear skirts, not trousers to work. If I expressed an opinion in what I wrote or revealed a truth which was embarrassing for somebody, powerful people would complain about a slip of a girl getting above herself, and they used such language at the time. Girls, and they always called us girls, were not supposed to get above themselves. Maybe I've been a cocky sort of person, but I've gone above myself for most of my life, and I'd like to think that most women would do the same thing. But I know I got my start in RTE because the women's liberation movement had embarrassed RTE. And yet, when I went in for my first interview with RTE for a job, they said, but could we send a woman to Northern Ireland? This was a serious question they were asking me. And I said that I covered lots of stuff in Northern Ireland for my local paper, and that I knew the North well, that I had cousins in Derry. They go before an equality tribunal if they try to ask a question like that now. They may still think it now, but they can't ask the question anymore, which is, a wonderful relief. And I went on to spend many years covering Northern Ireland. It was one of the favourite parts, I must say, of my journalistic career, because the North, once you know it, once you've lived there, once you're part of it, you fall in love with the place despite everything. And I learned early on to, I moved to London and I worked in Belfast as well for a while for RTE, and then came back to front programmes, that you, as a broadcaster, were as good as your last broadcast. You had to be as good as any man, and maybe you had to be a little bit better in order to hold your own. And you were constantly having to prove your right to hold this precious job, because certainly fronting a current affairs programme was the job that not only every little girl wanted, but every little boy wanted as well. And you knew you had to be on your guard all the time. And I can remember working in BBC Newsnight and being in the little presenter's cubbyhole, which was just off the main office. And a young man came in, a very ambitious young reporter. He came in and he mooched around. I said, what does he want in here? I'm busy, marching up and down, getting in my way. And eventually, he finally burst out, out with it. He said, I want your job. I want to be doing your job. I should be doing your job, he said. And he was an ambitious young man who had expected that he would be next in line when a vacancy came up, and instead they rang me in Dublin and they gave it to me, and he felt affronted because he felt entitled to the job. And that was the sense that came across from him. I'm a man and you're a woman, you shouldn't have this job. And it was quite extraordinary. Eventually I just said, hey, listen, tough, okay? And we both started to laugh. And he realised how ridiculous he sounded, and we sort of became half friends after that. But I do remember sitting there thinking, where does he get this sense of entitlement from? And, you know, do I have that sense of entitlement? I don't. I think if I'm good enough, I get the job. But he felt he should have the job because he was a man. And you came up against that all the time. In fact, most people wanted my job, actually. Most people want front programs. So there were loads of people out there who wanted your job. And you found out as a presenter that your friends were your fellow presenters. Brian Farrell was a great and generous friend to me. And time and again, when I was under pressure, he would come over and he'd sit there with you. And if it was a producer who'd been getting at you, he'd say, listen, he'll be gone in a year. You'll be here, I'll be here, he'll be gone. And it's just a matter of putting up with it for the moment. Unfortunately, I couldn't always do that. I miss him, he was a wonderful broadcaster. It's happened to me. It was last year, I was covering a Labour Party event during the Labour Party leadership contest. And Martina Devlin, who's RT's political correspondent now, came over to me. And she said to me, listen, she said, I always wanted to say to you, when I was a child, I'd see you presenting Today Tonight, and I'd say to myself, hey, I can do that. I can be her. And she said that was one of the things that got her started on her path to being a political journalist, and she's going from strength to strength. And I get great satisfaction from that, and from seeing her, even though I never actually, as such, lifted a finger to help her. And you know, for me, the role model was a woman called Susan Gagey, who did programs for 7 days when no other woman was doing politics and current affairs. And I remember seeing her, and I remember saying, I can do that. I can do television. It does matter. The role models do matter. She's now, of course, Susan Denham, the Chief Justice. And I was thinking about it upstairs before coming down, and I feel very strongly about it. I've had a great life, and it isn't over yet, and I love my job. But if I'm sorry about anything, it's that I didn't ask for more. The worst advice that my mother gave me, and I rarely criticise my mother, was that she said once to me, half in jest, she said, you know, you will learn that life is not about letting men run everything, but in letting them think that they run everything. And it's something, you know, I thought about myself again and again. Confrontation wasn't something she approved of. Don't be a fishwife, she'd say. Don't be a fishwife. Well, you know, I think I wish that I had been more of a fishwife. I wish I'd fought more battles for myself behind closed doors, particularly in the home. I wish that I had demanded absolutely equal shares of housework and child-minding. I wish that I had recognised that confrontation, as it was in journalism and on television, confrontation is an essential part of life, personal as well as professional. You know, people talk about premarital agreements. I think premarital agreements are a great idea. And I think they should include a commitment to share family duties. You know, get it down in writing, get it said. And if that isn't part of the contract that you're entering into with somebody, I would say to most women, think again. Because this is going to affect you for the rest of your life. Let's have a real bargain. Let's have a real sharing. And, you know, let's do the fighting while we still can, before we actually sign the dotted line. Let's all ask for more. And maybe let's ask more too for young women journalists. I was of the lucky generation that we were properly paid, and we had pensions, and the union looked out for us. So many of the new crop of young women journalists, and there are many of them, work on short-term contracts, even worse, work from shift to shift. And they do that not for 1 or 2 years, they often do it for 5 or 6 or 8. It's difficult. The industry is going through a particular time. But I think those of us who are older need to remember the vulnerability of people who are on those sort of arrangements. And if you're going to be vulnerable, you can be pushed around, advantage can be taken of you. Those of us who are in a position to better the working conditions of new young journalists, and perhaps particularly young women journalists, should do all we can for them. So just to go on to the women of Mary Cummins' generation, the women who stormed all the barricades. The great thing about them was, by God, they indulged in confrontation. They were fantastic. They confronted everything, and they were real bare-knuckle fighters. And I was in awe of them because they were so brave and so fearless, and so much women and very much not girls. Whenever I was with Mary Cummins, I was very conscious of her female strength, because Mary was very much a woman, to the tips of her fingertips. The Laura Ashley dresses, sometimes with little mirrored bits on them, and beads, and the dangling earrings, and the blue eyeshadow, and the mane of auburn hair, and the wonderful eyes she had, narrowed against a cloud of cigarette smoke. And as a countrywoman, I felt very at home with her countrywoman's shrewdness and her reserve. Mary could be very shy, but what I really envied was the earthy, wild side of her, the free spirit. We'd often have a cigarette together, and I'd tell her exactly what I thought and what I was going to write the next day, and Mary'd listen, and she'd smile, and she'd saunter off, and she'd come up with something in the paper next day, which was quite extraordinary. You never knew with Mary, you never knew what she was going to say or what she was going to come up with. When she wrote to the Irish Times wanting to be a journalist, it was such a wonderful letter that the news editor, Donald Foley, hired her on the spot on the basis of that letter alone. And that's my memory of Mary. I knew her through her writing. And the somewhat shy woman I'd share a cigarette with or have lunch with in the Dáil, the softly spoken person, well, the woman whose articles I read was powerful and sure-footed and compassionate. She put everything into her writing, and she could cover all the mainstream political and current affairs stuff, and she even gave it her own twist. But it was the insight she had into everyday experiences of people's lives, which was her forte. And when he died, we were so innocent. Her daughter Daisy has written that Daisy as a child wanted to be collected from school by a smilingly benign mother in twinsett and pearls, with dinner on the hob and a father due home from work at 6 o'clock. What she got instead was Mary in her Laura Ashley dresses with her cigarettes, and her independent spirit, and what seemed like her determination to mortify her small daughter at every moment, including striding into the men's loos and Switzers when the women's queue was too long. And also, of course, with Mary came her warm circle of women friends, including Mary Holland. And Daisy wrote, and it was after Mary Holland died, "I miss these women every day, especially my mother. Her wit, her black humour, her raucous laugh, her irreverence, her intelligence, her unconditional love and support, and the fighting. Nobody fights better than she did." And yeah, that's what we all miss, and it's a lesson that we still need to learn from those women. We need to fight for what we want. Nobody fought better than she did. And that, and her work, is why Mary Cummins lives on. That's why we still talk about her, and that's why I'm so proud to accept this award, inspired by her memory. Thank you.